a perspective into 1-point perspective, 2-point perspective, and 3-point perspective. Now, let me demonstrate the drawing method of 1-point perspective for you. First, draw a horizon line. Draw several objects above and below the horizon line. Connect the edges of the objects with the focal point. In this way, we can draw the perspective lines of several objects. Draw parallel lines of the objects. In this way, the size of the objects is determined. Arbitrarily intercept parallel lines of the objects on the perspective lines of the objects. For a more intuitive effect, I will emphasize it with colored pens. In this way, the 1-point perspective of 4 objects is drawn. 1-point perspective is mostly used when looking down purely and when the vision is focused on one point. In this way, the sense of perspective is relatively strong. 2-point perspective means there are 2 vanishing points on the left and right of the object. We still draw the horizon line and the central visual line first. Draw some perspective lines from the central visual line to the vanishing points on both sides. We can draw the left and right perspective of the object by intercepting a section in the perspective lines. The characteristic of 2-point perspective is that the left and right edges intersect and are parallel to the vertical lines on both sides of the vanishing point and the central visual line without perspective changes. 3-point perspective means there are 3 vanishing points in the perspective lines of the object. Above the horizon line is the upward-looking perspective, and below the horizon line is the downward-looking perspective. We still draw the horizon line as before and find the directions of the 3 vanishing points. Draw both the upward-looking perspective and the downward-looking perspective. The drawing methods on both sides are the same as in 2-point perspective. The vertical lines in 2-point perspective intersect on the central visual line upwards and downwards. Looking up, it becomes smaller upwards, and looking down, it becomes smaller downwards. How do we apply perspective when drawing still lifes? Let's take a cube as an example. If we can't see the left and right sides of the cube, when we draw it, it is 1-point perspective. If we add the downward looking perspective, what we draw is 2-point perspective. When we rotate it, is it the same as what we just talked about? Isn't it amazing? Adding the upward-looking perspective becomes 3-point perspective. When we draw objects that are not very tall, we generally use 2-point perspective and draw the downward perspective with the left and right sides as vertical. When drawing relatively tall objects, we use 3-point perspective. After saying so much, you only need to remember 8 characters. Near is large and far is small. Near is wide and far is narrow.